The barn on the far edge of Willow Draw had a way of holding the day's heat long after the sun fell behind the cottonwoods. Dust hung quiet as sleep in the rafters. A fly tapped at a window pane and gave up. In the east stall, somebody had dragged an old horse blanket over a mound of straw and made a nest of it, the kind a small creature would build when winter meant more than inconvenience. That was where Jessie Calder stopped, boots soft on the packed earth, tin mug cooling in his hand. She lay there with three small boys gathered against her, so close their breath rose and fell like one chest. All four were limp with the kind of sleep that comes only after walking farther than pride allows. One boy had his fingers looped through his mother's sleeve as if he decided she belonged to him, and it was settled. Another had a scuffed ear pressed to the brown and white kid goat curled in the crook of the woman's arm. The goat, too young to be anything but foolish, slept the hardest of them all, tiny jaw twitching. Straw stuck to everyone's clothing. The woman's hair was the color of dry prairie grass, and it had loosened itself from its pins as if it had grown tired of being good. Jesse stood there longer than he meant to. It wasn't only that he was startled to find them. He was. The Hart place sat a mile off the wagon road, and nobody wandered into this barn by mistake. It was more that the sight carried a weight that landed in his chest and would not be set down. A woman who had run out of better places to go had chosen his barn to run out in. He set the mug on a beam and crouched. Up close he could see she had rips along the hem of her skirt that had been mended with different color thread, each stitch its own decision. Her boots were cracked white where they bent. The boys were three of a kind, towheads, round-cheeked, the sort of eyes that made you think of blue china when they were open, and yet each held himself different. The one with his hand around her sleeve slept on his stomach like a colt. The one with the goat had the soot-smudged mouth of a child who'd fallen asleep mid-argument. The third, pressed tight to her side, had a corner of a cracker in his fist. He'd lost it to sleep, but he hadn't let go. Jesse cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, soft enough to be mistaken for wind if the wind had been brave enough to come inside. "Ma'am, you're safe here." Her eyes flew open. She did not startle the way a person who'd lived easy might. She came up like a sprung wire, body between him and the boys before she was even awake, one hand searching for something under the blanket. Jesse saw then, not a weapon, but a folded paper, stiff from travel. The goat bleated and set off a chain of small sounds. The crackle of straw, the dry rasp of breath caught too fast, the sleepy complaint of a boy who did not appreciate the world returning so abruptly. "It's all right," Jesse said, palms up. "I'm Jesse Calder, foreman here. You're on Heartland." He glanced toward the big doors where afternoon light cut a wide bar across the dirt. "I saw your tracks by the south gate. Figured a coyote got into the hay. Wasn't expecting you." The woman's breath steadied. She tucked the paper back under her skirts with a decisiveness that told him it meant something. "We can be gone by sundown," she said. Her voice was hoarse but not weak. "We just need it out of the sun a while." She looked toward the boys. "They didn't make it as far as I told them they would." "Looks like they made it far enough to find shade," Jesse said. He reached for his mug, held it out. "Water's cool." She studied him as if there were a test in it. Her gaze went to his hat brim, his coat that had seen too many fences, the buckle he'd polished with habit more than care. Whatever she looked for, she must have found enough of it. She took the mug, sipped, then held it to each boy's mouth in turn without waking them fully. The goat, misreading the situation with the confidence of goats everywhere, tried to nuzzle the mug. She lifted it out of reach, and the animal sighed like a disappointed uncle. "I'm Mara," she said finally. "Mara Whitcomb. These are Eli, Jonas, and Owen." She pointed gently, mother sure. "And that nuisance is Clover." Clover, Jesse repeated, because saying a name makes a creature feel welcome, and he could not bear the idea of anything in that stall feeling unwelcome a second longer. A spent silence followed, the kind that sits companionably when people have admitted their names and nothing else yet. Outside, a fence board popped in the heat. Somewhere far off, a prairie hen laughed to herself. Jesse set his hat back an inch and decided what could be done. "You can rest," he said. "Won't be any riding you off. Mrs. Hart would have my head if I ran a woman and babies from her barn. She's away in town with Mr. Hart, but I can get you bread and a little stew if the boys'll eat. You look like you haven't had more than a promise since noon." Mara's mouth softened and then tightened again, like a door that opens and remembers it's been ordered shut. "Not charity," she said. "I can work. I can wash, sew, churn, whatever needs doing while we're here. We don't take what we can't pay for." "Then we'll call it a trade," Jesse said. "You take the food now and give us back your hands later. That suits me." She looked at him for a long breath, as if weighing whether a man who used the word trade so gently could be trusted. Then she nodded. He stood to go. "Mr. Calder," she said quickly before he reached the door. "If a man comes asking, if anyone does—" Jesse waited. She didn't finish. He didn't press. "I'll tell them I haven't seen you," he said evenly. "Which will be honest. I haven't seen a runaway mother and her boys. I've seen a woman with tired feet who needed a place to sit." Her shoulders loosened, almost, but not quite. "Thank you." The first spike came with the food. Jesse carried in a pot with the noon stew still warm at the bottom, a heel of bread, and a crock of milk that he regretted to find a little sour. The boys woke to the smell and turned from warm-blooded goats to hungry colts in seconds. It was the particular greed of small children, beautiful because it didn't know it was desperate. They ate with both hands, quiet but intent, and when the goat tried to climb into the bowl, Owen, smallest, patted its nose with a toddler's rank authority. Mara served herself last and took little. "You're headed east?" Jesse asked, washing the pot out later at the pump while she stood nearby, the boys tumbling in the straw like puppies who had remembered their legs. "West," she said. "West, and then north. There's work in the beet fields near Fort Collins for women who can bring their own young. They said so at the agency." She almost smiled at his look. "We're not the first to hear about it." "Agencies say anything about resting before you got there?" he asked dryly. "That part they left out," she said, and he caught the brief glint of humor, like a penny in a shallow stream. It surprised him how much relief that small glint brought. Spike 2 wheels slipped in sideways an hour later, when the wind shifted and carried the sound of riders from the far road. Not many, 2 or 3 by the cadence, but men who didn't talk to fill quiet. Jesse's head lifted before he knew he was listening. He wasn't a man who chased trouble, but he'd learned when it changed horses. Mara noticed his gaze toward the open doors. She put Clover into Eli's lap and stilled her hands. Without asking, she slid that folded paper deeper into the waistband of her skirt. The movement was small, but final. He didn't pretend he hadn't seen it. Some things were safer named. "Who's looking for you, Mrs. Whitcomb?" he asked quietly. She wet her lips. "A man with less patience than God, and more money than kindness," she said, voice thin. "And he doesn't look for people. He has them fetched." She blinked. "I told you not charity." Jesse wasn't sure which part of that he disliked most. He had no right to the riddle, but the rider's sound told him he had no time to refuse it. He thought of the Hart's brand-new seed drill in the equipment shed, shiny teeth never yet set into soil. He thought of Mrs. Hart's heavy blue kettle, always full of something hot for whoever rode in with dust on them. He thought of 3 boys who had slept like one chest. "Stay here," he said. "Keep quiet. If anyone comes in, you're a cousin of mine passing through. Name Ruth. Boys are mine for the hour, because you had a headache." He tried a smile to make it lighter and failed. "Don't leave tonight." She blinked at the words, and they hit him then how intimate they sounded, how quick a thing can cross the space between strangers if it's spoken right. He said them again, lower and urgent. "Don't leave tonight." "Why?" she whispered. "Because men who don't talk while they ride don't smile while they ask," he said, and stepped out into the yard. 3 horsemen turned in at the gate. The lead wore a city hat he thought made him look important, and instead made him look unaccustomed to wind. The other 2 were ranch hands by their seats, loose, shoulders easy, eyes that had learned the trick of measuring a man before his mouth moved. None of them had dust enough for long miles. Jesse waited where a man waits who has no reason to be nervous, palms clean, hat forward. "Afternoon," the lead said. He took in Jesse, the barn, the pump, the empty dooryard with clotheslines drooping like tired arms. "Looking for travelers. Woman about 25, 3 small children. Might have a goat." His mouth twitched, as if the last detail had offended his sense of order. "You seen such?" Jesse tipped his hat brim toward the west pasture. "Only travelers we get are cows. They travel in circles and complain about the feed, no children with them, and heaven help us if they had goats." The man didn't laugh. "Name would be Mara Whitcomb," he said. "She might be calling herself something else. Papers she took don't belong to her." Jesse felt the click inside his chest where a man chooses. It was the same click he'd felt a decade earlier on a cattle drive when a storm turned a river into a knife, and a boy no older than 16 went under. Back then he jumped because nobody else had, because you do not watch a boy learn to drown if there is any other lesson to teach. Now he lied because the sound in the barn behind him had been the quietest thing in the world, and that quiet deserved a chance. "Haven't seen her," he said. "If she comes by, I'll tell her a man with a neat hat asked after her." He paused. "What's your claim on her?" "Debt," the man said. "She owes a man of means passage money. Took the money, ran anyway. There's a bonus for any help that points us right." Jesse kept his face steady. He could feel sweat in the hollow of his back where the shirt stuck. "We don't do much pointing around here. Wind tends to change folks' minds." The man's eyes cooled. He looked past Jesse as if his gaze could lift the barn like a lid. "You won't mind if we look in your outbuildings?" "I do mind," Jesse said, polite as a fence rail. "Hearts don't let strangers walk into their shadows without a reason." The smallest of the 2 riders, the one with wheat-colored hair and a scar tucked along his jaw like a white thread, spoke for the first time, voice not unkind. "We're not the law, Calder. We're only men sent to fetch a woman who stole from a boss who thinks he's the law." He lifted a hand as if to placate. "If she's not here, we're 5 minutes and gone." Jesse thought of Mara's fingers shaking as they held the tin mug to a sleeping boy's mouth. He thought of the word stole and how men with money stretched it to fit whatever made them angry. He considered kicking up a fuss and realized fuss invited examination. He considered riding for the hearts and realized the time for second opinions had passed. "You can look in the tool shed," he said levelly, "and the chicken house if you're brave. The rooster's got more opinions than the county judge. Barn's full of green hay and a sick mare I'd rather not stir." He put just enough irritation at the end to make it believable. They made a show of glancing toward the tool shed, to humor him or themselves. The lead dismounted and walked slow, as if the dirt owed him tribute. He went to the shed, peered in, made an ostentation of not seeing anything useful. The scarred one stayed mounted, watching Jesse with a face you might trust to tell you where the water was if you were dying of thirst, but not whether it was fit to drink. The third man rode a small circle and sniffed the air like a dog who'd forgotten what he was tracking. A sudden rustle in the barn made Jesse's blood stop. Clover, offended at being restrained for longer than a goat's patience, chose that moment to deliver a bleat of protest that could have been heard on the moon. The lead man's head turned. "Mare sounds healthy to me," he said, and put his hand on the barn door. "Hold," Jesse said, not loud, but with the command you use for horses and men both. "She'll kick if she hears boots she doesn't know." He took a step, easy, as if to mediate between a woman and a door, and the unknown on both sides. He found he was breathing through his mouth because the barn air had got thin. Behind him, he heard the scrape of a boot just inside the straw. He knew Mara had stood. He could imagine her putting a boy behind each leg and scooping the third on her hip. He could almost hear the breath she drew to make herself larger than fear. The man with the scar shifted in his saddle and said, not to Jesse, but to the lead, "We're losing light." He sounded tired in a way that didn't have to do with daylight. "We've got the creek to cross before dark if we mean to reach the hotel." The lead looked from the barn door to Jesse and then to the road. Money counted time differently than children did. He did that arithmetic and found it unfriendly. "We'll be back," he said at last, like a promise and a threat had been given the same name. "Tomorrow at first light. Don't find yourself standing between a man and what he's owed, Mr. Calder. It makes a body thin." Jesse tipped his hat as if it were a benediction. "I appreciate the advice. I'll eat more supper." They rode out, the small cloud of their passing sifting across Jesse's boots. He stood in the yard until the shape of them was no longer men, but dust and sound. Then waited longer, counting slow to 30, with the patience he had learned starting skittish colts. When he turned back, Mara was at the threshold, Clover tucked under one arm. Boys gathered like a spill of wheat at her skirts. Her face was white, but steady. "Don't leave tonight," he said a third time, because the words had become a fence. "What if they come early?" she asked. Her voice had learned stillness quickly, as if it had been expecting lessons. "Then we'll be earlier," he said. "We'll move you before the rooster remembers his opinions." She set Clover down. The goat immediately attempted to eat a braid of straw hanging from a peg, and Jesse, absurdly, felt his throat close as if someone had tightened a belt around it. He understood, with a force that shamed him for every small selfish choice he'd made at his own table, that whatever paper she carried under her skirt did not belong, could not belong, to the men who had ridden up with neat hats and borrowed anger. He did not understand what it was, only that it mattered enough to bend a woman's life toward danger. "Mr. Calder," Mara said, and for the first time there was warmth in it, not trust yet, but its distant cousin. "You didn't have to lie." "I didn't," he agreed. "But sometimes it's the only work that pays right." He rubbed his jaw and glanced at the darkening road. "We'll bunk you in the loft. Cooler up there and no line of sight from the yard. I'll bring quilts. After dark, we'll talk about where you head next, and you'll tell me enough of the truth to keep me from stepping you into worse trouble than you're already in." She nodded, a small, grave movement, then put a hand to her skirt where the paper lay. "It's not my trouble alone," she said quietly. "It's theirs." She looked at the boys. Eli had acquired a piece of twine and was trying to tie Clover to a beam with the serious cruelty of children who do not yet know what kindness asks. Mara untied the knot gently and put the twine in her pocket. "What is it?" Jesse asked. He kept his voice too soft to echo. She hesitated. He thought, just for a heartbeat, she might tell him. Then Owen tugged her sleeve and held up the cracker he'd found again, as if he believed it worthy of celebration. She smiled down at him and didn't answer. The last spike came on quiet feet when night settled, and the lamp in the kitchen window painted a square of gold on the yard. Jesse climbed the ladder with quilts over his shoulder and found the loft half shadow, half moon. He stopped at the top rung. Mara had tucked the boys together under the blanket, Clover a warm weight at their feet. She sat upright, eyes open to the dark, listening. You could tell, even from the ladder, that she would not let herself sleep until the barn learned her breathing. He stepped onto the loft and set the quilts within reach. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he murmured. She didn't turn. "Don't say my name, please," she whispered, not unkind. "Name's Carrie." "All right." He waited. "Tomorrow we'll take you to the Hart's old line cabin by the creek. It's tight but dry. 2 days there, and those men'll be bored of their own voices. Then we'll see where the road wants you." She nodded. After a moment she said, "The paper, they'd call it theft. It's not. It's proof. My husband made a claim 2 years ago on land that was supposed to be worthless. He died before he could record it. The man who lent us money found out it isn't worthless anymore. He'd take it from the boys. I won't let him." Her voice went quieter still. "I won't." Jesse's hand found the rail. He was not a man given to oaths. He was, however, a man who understood the shape of a promise when it pressed against his ribs. He felt, in that instant, the story pull taut between this loft and a creek he had not yet seen, between the woman at his feet and the men who would ride again at dawn. From the yard came the soft creak of leather, slow, careful, not the wind. Jesse blew out the lamp. The loft fell to blue. He reached for Mara's hand without thinking and found it. Her fingers were cold but sure. "Don't breathe loud," he whispered, "and don't leave tonight." Below them, the barn door eased open, inch by inch, as if someone thought darkness could be convinced to forget who had walked through it. The sound of that barn door inching open in the dark was enough to bring Jesse's pulse into his throat. He could feel Mara's hand still in his, the faint tremor running through it. The boys stirred once in their sleep, but only enough to curl closer around the goat, who for once stayed quiet, as if even Clover understood the weight of silence. Jesse crouched low and moved toward the ladder. He didn't climb down, just leaned far enough to see the shapes below. The moonlight was spilling through the open door in a pale stripe, and in that stripe stood a single figure, tall, shoulders squared under a trail coat. The man didn't move like one of the ranch hands who'd ridden up earlier. This one moved with the slow assurance of somebody who thought the place already belonged to him. The man paused, as if listening, then took 2 steps inside. Jesse caught the faint creak of leather, the scrape of a spur against dirt. He didn't need a lantern to know the stranger was scanning the stalls, looking for any shape that didn't belong. Jesse straightened and stepped into the loft shadows. "Evening," he said, keeping his voice level. "Barn's closed up for the night." The man looked up, his face half in shadow. "You Jesse Calder?" "That's me." Jesse kept one hand resting on the rail, the other out of sight. "And you are?" "Name's Holt," the man said. His voice had the slow drawl of somebody born west of the divide. "I'm foreman over at the Merton spread. Got word a woman and 3 young'uns were headed this way. I figure if they came through, they might have passed along trouble in their wake." "Trouble doesn't need to pass through," Jesse said. "It finds its own road." Holt's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's so?" "It is." Jesse leaned an elbow on the rail, as if nothing in the world worried him. "You planning on telling me why you're in another man's barn after dark, without knocking?" There was a long pause. Then Holt smiled faintly, just enough to show he wasn't here on official business. "Let's just say I've got reason to keep an eye on who's crossing this part of the county. My boss doesn't like strangers cutting through his interests." Jesse didn't move. "Then you can tell your boss nobody's here but Hart cattle, and a foreman who likes to sleep through the night." Holt studied him for another moment, then nodded once. Fair enough. He turned and walked out, the barn door closing behind him without a sound. Jesse stayed at the rail until he heard the hoofbeats fade. Only then did he let go of the breath he'd been holding. Mara's whisper drifted from the dark behind him. He wasn't with the others. No, Jesse said, turning back toward her. Which means more than one man wants what you're carrying. Her eyes caught a sliver of moonlight, and for the first time he saw the steel under the fatigue. I told you, it isn't just paper. It's the only thing standing between my boys and a life spent answering to men like him. Down below, Clover shifted in the straw, and the boys murmured in their sleep. Jesse realized that whatever trail Mara had been on before she came here, it was only going to get rougher. And now, whether he'd meant to or not, he was on it too. By the time dawn stretched over the cottonwoods, Jesse had made up his mind. Mara and the boys couldn't stay in the barn another night. The riders would be back, and maybe next time they'd have the law, or something that passied for it, riding with them. He brought a breakfast of biscuits and cold bacon up to the loft. The boys sat cross-legged, still blinking sleep from their eyes as they chewed, Clover happily gnawing a crust beside them. Mara ate little, her gaze fixed on the strip of light widening at the barn door. When the sun's high, Jesse said quietly, we'll head for the line cabin by the creek. It's off the road and choked in willows. You can hole up there 2, maybe 3 days. Give those men time to ride in circles. And after that, Mara asked. You tell me where you need to be, and I'll see you there, Jesse said. He surprised himself with the certainty in his own voice. Mara's lips pressed together in something that was not quite gratitude and not quite doubt. You don't know me, she said. I know enough, Jesse replied. You've got more grit than half the men I've worked with, and you'd rather sleep in a barn than take charity. That's all I need. They left just before noon, Jesse leading the way with 2 saddled horses. Mara rode one, a boy in front of her and another behind, while Jesse took the second with the third boy and Clover in a burlap sack tied to the saddle horn. The goat bleated its displeasure at every jostle. The ride to the creek was slow but uneventful until they reached the bend where the trail narrowed between 2 outcroppings of red rock. Jesse halted suddenly, raising a hand. In the dust ahead were fresh hoofprints, several horses, heading toward the ranch. They'll find the barn empty, Mara said quietly. They'll also know you're on the move, Jesse said. We'll have to take the back cut along the ridge. It was a rougher path, steep in places, but it kept them out of sight. By late afternoon, they reached the line cabin, a squat timber structure with a roof patched in 3 different kinds of shingles. Jesse swung down, lifted each boy to the ground, and helped Mara dismount. Inside, the air was cool and carried the scent of old cedar. There was a cot in the corner, a table with one leg propped on a stone, and a narrow window that looked out toward the creek. It wasn't much, but it was safe. As Jesse carried in the saddlebags, Mara stood in the doorway, looking toward the horizon. They won't stop, she said. Not while they think I've got something they can use. Then we make them think you don't, Jesse said. She turned to him. And how do you propose to do that? By making them look in the wrong place, Jesse said. And by the time they realize, you and the boys will be too far to follow. That night, as the boys slept on the cot under Mara's watchful eye, Jesse sat outside by the small fire, thinking through the paths and gullies he knew better than most. He could hear the creek gurgling just beyond the willows. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called. The quiet didn't last. Hoofbeats again, this time closer, slower, as if the riders were picking their way through brush. Jesse doused the fire with his boot and slipped inside. Mara looked up from the cot, her eyes wide. They're here, Jesse whispered, and they're not looking for the barn this time. The sound grew louder until it seemed to press against the walls of the little cabin. Then a voice called out, low and deliberate. "Mara Whitcomb, you can run all you like, but you can't hide forever." Jesse moved to the door, every muscle taut. "Stay with the boys," he said, "no matter what." Mara's voice was a whisper in the dark. "Don't leave tonight." Outside, the hoofbeats stopped. Whoever was out there had decided to wait, and waiting, Jesse knew, could be worse than riding straight in. The night hung heavy around the little line cabin, the kind of quiet that had its own pulse. Jesse stood just inside the door, his palm resting on the worn wood, listening. Outside, the horses snorted softly, shifting in place. Whoever had come wasn't moving off. They were settled in, watching, waiting. Mara was sitting on the cot, the boys pressed against her, all three wide-eyed in the dim glow from the embers in the stove. Clover, ever contrary, had wedged himself between Owen and Jonas, chewing on the hem of a blanket as if it might help. "Are they going to come in?" Eli's voice was barely more than a breath. Jesse glanced back. "Not if we're smart." He moved to the narrow window, pushing aside the threadbare curtain, just enough to see a flicker of movement. Two riders, their outlines sharp against the moonlit creek. They weren't close enough to rush the door, but they were close enough to block the only trail leading back toward the Hart Ranch. "They know we're here," Mara said quietly. "Likely," Jesse replied. "Question is, whether they're willing to wait until daylight or make a move in the dark." "They'll wait," Mara said, her tone steady, certain. "It's what he does." Jesse turned. "He." Her gaze dropped to the folded paper she kept tucked beneath her skirt. "The man with the neat hat, Lyle Benedict. He sent the others before. He doesn't get his boots dirty if he can have someone else do it. But if it matters enough, if he thinks it's slipping away, he'll come himself." "And this matters enough?" Jessie asked. Her jaw tightened. "If I keep it, it's the last piece of land my boys will ever own. If he gets it, it's just another section to fold into his cattle empire. But it's more than that." She hesitated. "It's where my husband's buried. The ground he swore would feed our sons." The words were steady, but Jessie saw the way her hands trembled. Not fear alone, something deeper, rawer, grief still living close to the surface. A sudden splash from the creek cut through the stillness. Jessie moved back to the door, listening. The riders hadn't shifted, but now there was a third shadow, one that hadn't been there before, slipping along the bank. "They're splitting up," Jessie murmured. "One's coming through the willows." Mara's hand went to the boys, pressing them back against the wall. "What do we do?" Jessie took a breath. "We make it look like we're gone." In the next minutes, they moved quickly but quietly. Jessie shoved the table against the far wall, pulled the cot toward the door, and kicked straw from a feed sack into the empty space beneath the window. "When I give you the word, you and the boys slip out the window and follow the creek upstream. There's a cut in the bank about 200 yards up. You can hide there until I come for you." "I'm not leaving you here," Mara said. "You're not," Jessie replied. "You're leaving this cabin. That's different." He gave her a look that brokered no argument. The movement in the willows grew louder, brush snapping under boots. Jessie's mind ran the trail of every possible outcome, and none ended without risk. A voice called softly from the darkness, closer now. "Mara, you're making this harder than it needs to be." Mara froze. "That's him," she whispered. Jesse stepped to the door, his voice hard. "You've got no place here, Benedict." The brush stilled, then, slow and deliberate, Lyle Benedict stepped into the clearing, moonlight falling over his sharp suit and that same neat hat. "Foreman Calder," he said as though they were acquaintances meeting in town. "You've been keeping a guest I've been trying to fetch for days." "She's not yours to fetch," Jesse said. Benedict smiled without warmth. Everything on this side of the county line is mine, sooner or later. He took another step. Now, why don't we keep this civilized? You mean the way you send men to scare a woman traveling with 3 children? Jesse asked. Benedict's eyes cooled. She took something that isn't hers. I'm here to see it returned. You can step aside, and I'll forget you were a part of it. From the corner of his vision, Jesse caught Mara's slight movement toward the window. Good. She understood the signal. I'm not in the habit of handing over guests, Jesse said. Benedict's voice sharpened. You think you can keep her from me? Jesse didn't answer. He heard the faint scuff of Mara's boots against the floor as she moved the boys toward the window. Clover let out a tiny bleat, quickly muffled. Benedict's gaze flicked toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. She's still here. Before he could take another step, Jesse swung the door wide and stepped into the moonlight, forcing Benedict's attention outward. You wanted me to step aside. This is me stepping out. Now, why don't we have our talk away from the cabin? Benedict's smile returned, colder this time. You think you're clever? Not clever, Jesse said. Just stubborn. Behind him, he heard the faint thud of feet hitting earth outside the back window. The boys, Mara, moving fast toward the creek. Benedict noticed too. She's running. Jesse stepped into his path. Then you'd best catch her. Benedict lunged forward, but Jesse blocked him, shoving hard enough to send the man stumbling sideways into the dirt. The second rider crashed through the willows, shouting, She's headed for the water, and Benedict was up, fury breaking through the polish. Jesse didn't wait to see which way they went. He bolted toward the creek, cutting upstream on a parallel line. If Mara made it to the cut bank before they spotted her, they had a chance. If not, a sharp crack split the night. Not a gunshot, but the brittle snap of a branch under a boot just ahead. Jesse slowed, easing into the shadows. Mara was crouched in the cut, the boys huddled under her arms, Clover pressed close. Her eyes found Jesse in the dark, wide and questioning. He crouched low. They're coming. Stay down. Benedict's voice carried over the creek, closer now. Mara, I don't want to hurt you, or the boys, but I will take what's mine. Her reply was steady, but low enough only Jesse could hear. It's not his, and I'll die before I give it up. Jesse's gut tightened. He believed her. Benedict's silhouette appeared just yards away, scanning the bank. Come out, Mara. Jesse's hand found the smooth rock at his feet. When I move, he whispered to her, you run. And before she could answer, he hurled the rock across the creek into the brush. It crashed loud enough to send both riders scrambling toward the noise. Go, Jesse hissed. Mara gathered the boys and ran, Clover bounding beside them. Jesse followed, every nerve wired tight. They didn't stop until the cabin was far behind and the creek bent into deeper shadow. Mara collapsed to her knees, the boys clinging to her, breath coming hard. They won't stop, she said again. This time it wasn't fear. It was a fact. No, Jesse said, scanning the dark. Which means we have to end this before sunrise. Her eyes lifted to his. How? Jesse's voice was low, but sure. By taking the fight to Benedict, on ground he doesn't control. The first bird calls of morning were already threading through the dark, and Jesse knew they had only hours before Benedict found their trail again. And in those hours, they'd have to risk everything. The first gray light of dawn found Jesse leading Mara and the boys along a deer track that wound through a stand of cottonwoods. The creek whispered beside them, its banks damp with the night's cool breath. Clover picked his way nimbly over roots, as though even the goat knew silence meant safety. We can't just keep running, Mara said, her voice low but urgent. He'll follow until he has it, or us. Her hand rested against her skirt, where the folded paper lay hidden. "If we don't stop him now, there won't be anywhere left to run to. That's why we're heading for the ridge," Jessie replied. "There's an old surveyor's hut up there. No road, no easy approach. We can see a mile in every direction. If Benedict wants to come for you, he'll have to do it in the open." The boys trudged along without complaint, though Jessie could see the fatigue in their small steps. Mara kept them moving, her quiet encouragement threaded with a mother's stubborn will. By the time they reached the ridge, the sun was brushing the treetops with pale gold. The hut was little more than a weathered shell of logs and rusted tin, but it held. Jessie ushered them inside and checked the sight lines from each gap in the walls. Down below, the land fell away in a slow slope of scrub and stone. If Benedict came, they'd see him long before he reached them. "What happens when he does?" Mara asked. Jessie looked at her for a long moment. "We show him the truth, that you're not alone in this fight, and that the law, as he's been telling it, doesn't hold here." She frowned. "The law's in his bucket." "Not all of it," Jessie said, pulling a folded oilskin from his coat. Inside was a letter bearing the seal of the county recorder. "I rode into town 2 days ago when I fetched supplies, asked some questions. Turns out your husband's claim was filed. Benedict's men just never let you see the proof. I've got a certified copy right here." Mara's breath caught. "You mean, I mean the land's yours. Always has been. And if Benedict tries to take it, he'll be breaking more laws than he can buy his way out of." Her hand went to her mouth, eyes bright with something she hadn't dared feel in weeks. Hope, but the sound of hoofbeats rising from the slope below cut through it. Jessie stepped to the doorway. 3 riders, Benedict at their head, were making the slow climb toward the hut. He rode like a man certain of his victory, his neat hat casting a sharp shadow over his eyes. "Mara Whitcomb," his voice carried up the ridge. "You can end this right now. Hand it over, and you walk away with your boys." Mara stepped forward, her chin lifted. "It's mine, Lyle. Always was." Benedict smiled thinly. "The paper says otherwise." "Not the paper I have," Jessie called down, holding the oilskin high. "Certified by the county. Says Mara Whitcomb owns every acre you've been trying to steal." The smile faltered, just a fraction. "You think a scrap of paper will stop me?" "It's not the paper," Jessie said. "It's the sheriff, who's about an hour behind you with 2 deputies. I sent word from the creek crossing last night. They'll be here before you ride down." Benedict's gaze sharpened, calculating. Behind him, one of his men shifted uneasily in the saddle. The sound of another set of hoofbeats, this time from the east, broke the standoff. 4 riders appeared, led by Sheriff Dugan himself. Benedict's jaw tightened. "You'll regret this, Calder." "Maybe," Jessie said, "but not today." Dugan rode up, his weathered face unreadable. "Mr. Benedict, you're under arrest for fraud and unlawful seizure. Your men can come quiet, or they can ride back to town in irons." The tension drained from Mara's shoulders as Benedict's men surrendered without a fight. Benedict himself sat stiff in the saddle, his eyes locked on Mara, until Dugan turned him toward the slope. When they were gone, the ridge fell quiet except for the wind in the grass. Mara turned to Jessie, her voice low. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't owe me thanks," Jessie said. "Just take the boys home. Make the land what your husband wanted it to be." Her eyes softened. "And you, will you come?" He hesitated, glancing toward the horizon. "I've got work here yet, but maybe, if the road runs that way." Mara smiled faintly, the kind of smile that promised patience. She reached down, took his hand, and for a long moment they stood like that. 2 people bound not by blood or past, but by the choice to stand together when it mattered. The boys came tumbling out of the hut then, Clover trotting after them, bleeding at the wind. Mara gathered them close, her gaze drifting to the land that was now truly theirs. "It's over," she said softly. "For now," Jesse replied. "But some things, the right things, are worth fighting for more than once." The sun broke fully over the ridge, washing the cabin, the scrub, and the little group in gold. And for the first time in too long, Mara let herself believe in a tomorrow that belonged to her and her sons. In the wide hush of the frontier, some battles are fought with grit, others with grace, and the rarest with both. Mara's fight was neither for land nor paper, but for the right to raise her boys on soil their father once called home.